Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to tackle a concept that usually sits in the absolute bottom drawer of boring city council meeting minutes.
Right.
It's a term called adaptive reuse. Now, before you reach for the skip button, stick with me, because we aren't going to look at this through a textbook.
No, definitely not. We're taking a much more interesting route today.
We are looking at this concept through the eyes of someone who calls himself an old software plumber.
Which is already such a fantastic job title.
It really is. We're analyzing a specific source today, a blog post titled Notes on Photography, Part 226, The Timeless Appeal of 1960s Architecture.
And it was published very recently, January 25, 2026, by an author named Ang.
Right, on his site, kianmang.org.
And I think it's important to set the stage here. This is not, an article in Architectural Digest. This is a personal observation from a technical mind.
From a guy who spends his nights tinkering with code. And we're going to see how that specific coder brain decodes the physical world around him. So our mission for this deep dive is kind of twofold. First, we need to unpack the actual architecture he's talking about. Why does a guy who writes software for a living care about 1960s roof lines? What's the appeal?
Right.
But secondly, and I think this is where the real gold is, we're going to look at the context of this source. We're going to look at everything else this guy writes about to understand a mindset of continuous observation.
It's really a masterclass in how to pay attention. But, before we get to the philosophy, we have to start with the concrete, literally.
Right. Let's start with the hook of the article. Ang describes taking a Sunday drive and stumbling upon a stunning example of adaptive reuse.
Yep.
Now, you're the expert here. Can we just pause and clarify what adaptive reuse actually means? Is it just a fancy way of saying renovation?
Yeah, that's a common misconception, but no, it's quite different. Renovation is usually just cosmetic, new paint, new fixtures.
Knocking down a wall to open up the kitchen, that kind of thing?
Exactly. Adaptive reuse is much more fundamental. It's the process of taking a building that has completely outlived its original purpose. Think of an old factory or a warehouse.
Or in this case, a 1960s home.
Right. A home that maybe doesn't fit modern family needs and giving it a completely new function while keeping the shell intact.
So it's recycling, but on a massive structural scale.
Exactly. It's recycling the embodied energy of the building. You aren't tearing it down. You are keeping the structure, but, well, changing the software running inside it, to use a metaphor our author would probably like.
Okay, that makes sense. So he finds this building, and he identifies 3 specific things that make this 1960s style really pop for him. He lists clean lines, low-density layouts, and the organic way the buildings follow the natural curves of the land.
And those 3 things are basically the holy trinity of mid-century modern design.
When I read clean lines, my mind just immediately goes to Mad Men, that sleek, sharp look. But why does a software plumber specifically care about that?
This is where we have to look at his background. The source explicitly mentions that he's involved with floss-free and Libre open-source software.
Right.
And in the software world, there is an obsession with something called clean code.
Clean code. Okay, unpack that.
Clean code is code that's easy to read, easy to understand, and efficient.
Yeah.
It doesn't have cruft. It doesn't have unnecessary complexity or spaghetti logic where everything's all tangled up. It's direct.
So when he looks at a 1960s building with clean lines,
he isn't just seeing a design choice. He is seeing clean code in concrete.
He's seeing a lack of noise.
Precisely. Before the modern era, architecture was often heavy on ornamentation. Gargoyles, intricate molding, decorative columns that didn't actually hold anything up.
Right.
Mid-century design stripped all that away. It said, here is the beam, here is the window, here is the roof. It's honest. And for a programmer who spends his life debugging complex systems, that visual honesty is, I think, incredibly soothing.
That makes a lot of sense. It's efficiency you can actually see. But then he brings up the second point, low-density layouts.
Right.
Now, this seems kind of counterintuitive. I mean, usually when we talk about modern urban planning, the buzzword is density. We need more density.
We need to stack people in vertical tubes to save the planet. Right?
Exactly. But Ang is praising the opposite here.
He is. And he gives a very specific reason for it. He says this style fosters walkability and a sense of community.
But wait, usually people say density creates walkability. If everything is close together, you walk more?
That's true for functional walkability, walking to the store or the subway. But I think Ang is talking about social walkability.
Social walkability.
Yeah, think about the difference between walking down a sterile hallway in a 50-story apartment complex versus walking through a 1960s neighborhood with low houses and big lawns.
In the hallway, you keep your head down. In the neighborhood, you might wave at people.
Exactly. The low-density layout creates sight lines. You can see your neighbors. You see the street. It feels human scale. The vertical tube approach, while efficient for space, can be incredibly isolating.
You're surrounded by people, but you don't know any of them.
Right. So Ang, looking at this through a systems lens, sees that the low-density system optimizes for community interaction, whereas the high-density system optimizes for, unit count.
It's a classic case of optimizing for different metrics.
Precisely.
Okay, so we have clean lines, which is efficiency, and low density, which is community. But then we hit the third element, and this is where the source gets really interesting because it introduces a conflict. He talks about the organic way the buildings follow the natural curves of the land.
Organic architecture. It was a term popularized by Frank Lloyd Wright, and it was a huge influence on the 1960s. The core idea is that a building shouldn't look like it just, landed from outer space.
It should look like it grew out of the ground.
Yes, it should respect the topography.
Which sounds beautiful and poetic. But Ang points out a serious bug in this system. He calls it a geography problem.
Right. And this is the reality check part of his post. He notes that this specific layout, spreading out, hugging the curves, is most effective on flat terrain.
And according to the source, the region where he lives is quite hilly.
That is a massive constraint. It's a deal breaker.
Why is that such a deal breaker? I mean, we have bulldozers. Can't we just, build the same house on a hill?
You can, but you violate that organic principle he just praised. To put a sprawling, flat layout on a steep hill, you have two options, really, and both are bad.
Okay.
Option one, you do massive cut and fill engineering, you bring in heavy machinery, you blast away the hillside, and you create a flat shelf.
So you basically terraform the hill into submission.
Exactly. You are fighting the land. You destroy the very natural curve you were supposed to be celebrating.
And option two?
You put the whole thing on massive stilts. But then the building doesn't feel grounded. It feels precarious. It's like an imposition.
Right. Ang calls replicating this style today a significant challenge because of this. And that brings us right back to adaptive reuse.
It does.
Because if you can't easily build new ones like this on a hill, the value of the old ones, it just goes way up.
Absolutely. The stunning example he found was likely built back in the 60s when developers could handpick the best spots. Maybe that spot was naturally flatter, or maybe the cost of custom fitting the foundation to the slope was just lower back then.
So the legacy code works better than the new update.
That is the perfect analogy. If you tried to rewrite that building from scratch today, tear it down and build new wars, you'd likely end up with a generic box that fights the hill, because that's what the economics dictate.
But by reusing the existing shell,
you preserve that perfect integration with the land, you get the feature of the organic curve without the bug of massive terraforming costs.
I really like that framing. It makes preservation sound less like nostalgia and more like just smart engineering.
It is smart engineering. It's efficient.
Speaking of smart engineering, I want to pivot here because, frankly, the architecture analysis is interesting, but the person doing the analysis is fascinating.
The observer behind the blog.
Yes. When we prepped for this deep dive, we didn't just look at this one post. We looked at the sidebar, the archives, the whole ecosystem of the site.
And the sheer volume of output is, it's staggering.
It is the most striking thing about the source material. We aren't looking at a polished magazine here. We're looking at a personal digital garden that has been growing wild for years.
Let's just run through some of the data points.
Okay, so this architecture post is Notes on Photography, part 226. That's impressive enough.
But then you scan down the list, Notes on Gardening, part 787.
787 entries on gardening.
Wow.
Notes on fish keeping, part 179. Notes on Haskell programming, part 40. And looking at the timestamps, in January 2026 alone, the source lists 75 posts.
Wait, 75 posts in 1 month?
Yes, that's an average of about 2.5 posts every single day.
That is relentless.
Yeah.
That is a level of discipline that's hard to wrap your head around.
And it makes you ask, who is this guy? Is he just a random collector of hobbies?
Yeah, because on the surface, Haskell programming and fish keeping feel like they belong to two different people.
Right. One is rigid, mathematical, abstract logic. The other is wet, biological, messy, and involve algae.
It does seem disconnected at first glance.
Yeah.
but I don't think it's random at all. If you look closely at the titles provided, I think there is a huge through line connecting all of these.
What's the connection?
It's systems thinking.
Okay, break that down. How does the fish tank connect to the code?
Well, look at the specific titles mentioned. In Fish Keeping Part 175, he's writing about decoding duckweed.
Mm-hmm.
In Part 173, it's the blackbeard algae.
The blackbeard algae sounds like a pirate villain.
Is a villain in a fish tank. It's this invasive, stubborn algae. But look at how he approaches it. He's not just complaining about it. You're trying to decode the environment. He's asking, what are the inputs? Is there too much light? Is there an imbalance in CO2? He is debugging the ecosystem.
He's troubleshooting nature.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now flip to the software side. Notes on Haskell programming. Haskell is a notoriously strict mathematical, logic-based language. It's all about inputs, outputs, and pure functions.
So when he is staring at the algae and when he is staring at the computer screen...
He's actually doing the same thing.
Yeah.
He's looking for the underlying rule set. He's looking for the structure.
And that brings us right back to the architecture, doesn't it?
It does, because what is architecture? It's the physical intersection of those two worlds. It's where structural integrity, the math, the gravity, the clean lines, the code meets the organic environment.
The hills, the rain, the light.
Exactly.
That is such a cool insight. The building is the interface between the code and the garden.
Yes. And the fact that he can toggle between these modes so instantly. I mean, in his recent post list, you literally have understanding monads, which is a very complex programming concept, sitting right next to a post about soil quality.
Wow.
That shows a brain that doesn't compartmentalize.
Yeah.
He sees the whole world as a series of interconnected systems.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the Floss-Ars connection, free and Libre open source software.
Right.
We touched on clean code, but there's a philosophical side to open source that I think really matters here. For the listener who maybe just uses their phone and doesn't think about it, can you explain that ethos?
Sure. The open source philosophy is built on the idea that technology shouldn't be a black box. You should be able to see inside it. You should be able to read the source code, modify it, fix it, and share those improvements.
So it's the opposite of a locked iPhone where you can't even open the case.
Exactly. Now apply that philosophy to a building. What is adaptive reuse?
Open source architecture.
Bingo. It is saying, we aren't going to tear this building down and buy some locked, prefabricated unit from a developer that we can't change. We are going to take the existing source code of this structure, the bricks, the beams, and we're going to fork it.
Forking in software means taking a copy of the code and taking it in a new direction, right?
Right. So adaptive reuse is forking the building. You're modifying it for your current needs, but you are respecting the original structure. You're keeping that knowledge accessible.
That's fascinating. So when the sidebar lists his support for the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the Free Software Foundation...
That isn't just a tech preference. It's a worldview. It is a consistent philosophy of openness, preservation, and integration. He values things that are open, repairable, and work with their environment, whether that thing is a text editor or a mid-century home.
You know, there is one other detail about the source that I found really charming. It's the titles themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Notes on, first steps in. My first, even after almost 800 posts on gardening, he is still calling them notes.
It suggests a profound humility, doesn't it? He isn't writing the definitive guide to gardening. He's writing, here is what I noticed today.
It prevents it from feeling like a lecture. It feels like we're just looking over his shoulder.
And I think that's the real takeaway for our listener here. We often think that being well-informed means knowing all the answers. But looking at Ang's work, I think being well-informed is actually about the discipline of taking the notes.
The discipline of noticing.
Right. Think about it. Most of us walk past that 1960s building and our brain just registers the generic tag, house. And we keep walking. Ang walks past it. And because he has trained himself to notice systems, he registers clean lines, low density, flat terrain constraint, adaptive reuse opportunity. He sees the metadata.
And he only sees that because he practices seeing it. Writing 75 posts a month, even if they're short, forces you to process what you see.
It's active processing. You can't just passively consume the world if you have to write about it every few hours. And notice how he applies that clean code principle to the writing itself. The posts are short, distinct, categorized.
He's organizing his own mind in public.
Yeah.
So if we pull this all together, we started with a specific building on a Sunday drive, but we've really ended up talking about a lifestyle.
I think so. The big insight here is about integration.
Integration.
We tend to compartmentalize our lives. We say, this is my work mode, where I write code, and this is my hobby mode, where I garden.
And this is my living mode, my house.
Right. But Ang's blog shows us that the principles are universal.
The clean lines of the code help you appreciate the building. The organic growth of the garden helps you understand why the building fails on a hill.
Exactly. If you learn to see systems in one place, you start seeing them everywhere. And the beauty of that is that the world becomes infinitely more interesting. You're never just bored on a walk, because there's always a system to debug or a pattern to admire.
It also challenges the way we build things today. We talked about how modern construction often fights the land.
Right. Ang is reminding us that there was a time, and there are still places, where the goal was to work with the environment, and that reusing those spaces might be better than building new ones that lack that sensitivity.
It's a lesson in sustainability that goes beyond just saving energy. It's about aesthetic sustainability.
Things look better when they fit, whether it's code fitting the function or a house fitting the hill.
Exactly. So here's a final thought for you to chew on as you go about your day. We've been talking about this software plumber who looks at a building and asks, is the code clean? Does it fit the hardware of the landscape?
Right.
Take a look at the buildings you passed today. Maybe it's your office, the grocery store, maybe it's your own home. Ask yourself the question Ang asked. Is this building working with its environment, or is it fighting against it?
Is it hugging the curve, or is it just a box dropped from the sky?
And if it is just a box, think about the concept of adaptive reuse. How would you debug it?
That's the question.
Thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.